January 14th, 1942. 280 feet beneath the North Atlantic, 150 miles west of Scotland. The silence inside U-96 was absolute. 44 men held their breath in the cramped steel cylinder, listening to the rhythmic ping of British ASDIC searching for them through the black water above. Ping, ping, ping. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock pressed his ear against the cold steel hull in the commander's compartment, counting the intervals between sonar pulses. 8 seconds. The British destroyer was close, perhaps 400 meters, circling like a shark that had caught the scent of blood but couldn't quite locate its prey. "Depth charges," whispered Obersteuermann Klaus Bargston from the control room, his voice barely audible over the electric hum of the batteries. Lehmann-Willenbrock nodded, though no one could see him in the red emergency lighting. He had heard them dropping, the distinctive splash as steel drums full of explosives tumbled from the destroyer's stern racks. Now came the waiting, the terrible, inevitable waiting. The first explosion hit like the fist of an angry god. Wham! The hull flexed inward, groaning under the shockwave. Cork insulation rained from the overhead. Light bulbs shattered in their fixtures, plunging sections of the boat into darkness. A young mechanic named Werner Schmidt bit his lip so hard blood ran down his chin, but he made no sound. Silence was survival. Any noise would give away their position. Wham! Wham! 2 more, closer. The boat shuddered violently. A wrench fell from its bracket, clattering against the deck plates with a sound that seemed deafening in the terror silence. Lieutenant Zur C. Horst Bredow, the first watch officer, closed his eyes and moved his lips in prayer. No one mocked him, not anymore, not after 6 months in the Atlantic. Wham! 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 The attacks came in patterns now, a rolling barrage that walked across the ocean floor toward them. Lehmann-Willenbrock calculated rapidly. 4 charges per pattern. The British destroyer was making runs perpendicular to U-96's course, dropping depth charges set to detonate at 150 feet and 250 feet, trying to bracket them. "Left full rudder," he said quietly. "Make your depth 180 meters. The helmsman's hands trembled as he turned the wheel. Diving deeper meant increased pressure on the hull, pushing the Type 7C submarine toward its theoretical limits. At 200 meters, the rivets might pop. At 220, the pressure hull could implode, crushing all 44 men into paste in milliseconds. But staying shallow meant certain death. The boat tilted downward, pressure gauges climbing, 160 meters, 170 meters. The hull groaned and creaked as millions of tons of seawater pressed inward from all sides. Someone in the engine room began to hyperventilate. Bargston shot him a warning glance that promised violence if he didn't control himself. Wham! 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 3 more, but these exploded above them now. The British commander had miscalculated, setting his charges too shallow. Relief flickered across the faces illuminated by the dying emergency lights. But Lehmann-Willenbrock knew better. The destroyer would adjust. They always did. Ping, ping, ping. The ASDIC was tracking them still, the sound echoing through the water like the ticking of a clock counting down to execution. Lehmann-Willenbrock checked his watch. 10:30 hours. The attack had begun at 0900, an hour and a half of this. How much longer could they endure? His leather-bound logbook sat on the tiny fold-down desk in his curtained sleeping alcove, still open to this morning's entry. The ink had barely dried when the British destroyer appeared on the horizon. He had written the words quickly, efficiently, with the same matter-of-fact tone he always used. Vessel number 23, British freighter, approximately 6,000 tons, torpedoed and sunk at 0647 hours. Position 56, Digdortwave N, 12 Bad Kalpa 3 W. Total tonnage destroyed, 142,147 tons, 23 ships. Since U-96's commissioning in September 1940, Lehman Willenbrock had sent nearly 143,000 tons of Allied shipping to the bottom. The numbers represented triumph, proof of German tactical superiority, evidence that the Kriegsmarine's U-boat arm could strangle Britain into submission. But those numbers meant nothing if he couldn't survive the next hour. Wham, 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 wham. 5 charges, perfectly spaced, detonating at 180 meters. One exploded so close that paint flaked from the interior bulkheads. A hairline crack appeared in one of the pressure gauges. Hydraulic fluid began dripping from a ruptured line, forming a puddle on the deck plates that reflected the emergency lights like spilled blood. "Chief," Lehman Willenbrock said calmly to his chief engineer, "can we make emergency speed on batteries?" "For perhaps 3 minutes, Herr Kaleo," came the reply, using the abbreviation for Kapitän Leutnant that marked respect and familiarity. "Then we'll have nothing left for surfacing." Lehman Willenbrock nodded. They were already deep into battery reserves. The boat had been submerged since dawn, running on electric motors that drained power with every revolution of the propellers. When the batteries died, they would be forced to surface directly beneath the British destroyer. Another option then. All stop. Rig for silent running. Shut down everything non-essential. The electric motors went quiet. The ventilation fans ceased their humming. Men stood motionless, afraid even to shift their weight. In the sudden silence, they could hear the destroyer's propellers churning the water overhead, the rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of British engineering searching for German lives to extinguish. Ping, ping, ping. The Aztec swept past them, moved away, returned. The British sonar operator was good, Lehman Willenbrock had to admit. Patient, methodical, not panicking into wasteful attacks. Just searching, searching, always searching. Time became elastic, meaningless. 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. Sweat ran down faces despite the cold. The air grew thick with carbon dioxide from 44 men breathing in a sealed steel tube. Someone vomited quietly into a bucket, trying not to make noise. The stench of diesel fuel, unwashed bodies, and fear became overwhelming. And then, impossibly, a second destroyer joined the hunt. The sound of new propellers, a different pitch, came from the south. Lehman Willenbrock felt his stomach drop. 2 destroyers meant coordinated attacks. One could keep them pinned down with Aztec while the other dropped depth charges. They could hunt U-96 in shifts, tag teaming until the submarine's batteries died or the hull cracked. Wham, 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 wham. 6 charges, 2 patterns, both destroyers attacking simultaneously. The boat lurched sideways. Men grabbed for support. A burst pipe in the head began spraying seawater into the forward compartment. 2 mechanics scrambled to close the valve, working in darkness as the emergency lights flickered and died. "Damage report," Lehman Willenbrock said quietly. The reports came back in whispers. Minor flooding in the bow compartment controlled. Crack in the pressure hull in the engine room. Leaking but holding. Battery cells potentially damaged. Hydrogen gas building up. Any spark now could turn the boat into a tomb. Hours passed. The attacks continued in waves, sometimes 5 minutes apart, sometimes 20. The British were pacing themselves, Lehman Willenbrock realized. They knew the submarine would have to surface eventually. They just had to wait. At 14:20 hours after 5 hours of continuous attack, Obersteuermann Bargsten caught Lehman Willenbrock's eye and made a slight gesture toward the depth gauge. They were at 195 meters now, nearly at maximum test depth. The batteries were at 8%. The air had grown so thick with carbon dioxide that men were losing consciousness. They had perhaps 20 minutes before the laws of physics forced them to surface and die. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the attack stopped. The propeller sounds faded. The Azdic pinging grew distant, then ceased entirely. Lehman Willenbrock waited 15 minutes, barely breathing, expecting a trap, but no new attacks came. The British destroyers had lost contact or been called away to another crisis. "Bring her up slowly," he ordered. "Periscope depth." U-96 began its creep toward the surface. Every meter of ascent, a gamble that the British weren't waiting with guns aimed at where the submarine would emerge. At 60 meters, Lehman Willenbrock ordered the periscope raised. He pressed his eye to the rubber cup and slowly rotated 360 degrees. Empty sea, gray waves under overcast skies, no destroyers. They were alone. "Surface," he said. The boat broke through into cold Atlantic air. The hatch clanged open and Lehman Willenbrock climbed to the bridge, gulping clean air that tasted like salvation. Behind him, men were already starting the diesel engines, recharging batteries, assessing damage. 147 depth charges. Lehman Willenbrock had counted every explosion during those 5 hours. 147 attempts to kill him and his crew. And they had survived through skill, through luck, through understanding the geometry of underwater death better than their hunters. That night, after repairs were completed, U-96 torpedoed another freighter from the same convoy the destroyers had been protecting. The ship broke apart and sank in 11 minutes. Lehman Willenbrock updated his logbook with the cold efficiency of a bookkeeper. Vessel number 24, British freighter, 7,500 tons. Position 56-6-8N, 11 sunk at 42 hours. The mathematics were clear. British escorts could harass, could frighten, could kill U-boats occasionally, but fundamentally depth charges were a weapon of desperation. They exploded where the submarine had been, not where it was. A skilled commander who understood the patterns, who could read the intervals between attacks, who knew when to dive deep and when to stay shallow. Such a commander could survive, and surviving meant winning. Each ship sunk was another blow to British supply lines. Each convoy attacked was another victory for the Reich. 3 weeks later, Lehman Willenbrock returned to Lorient, France, to a hero's welcome. The gray concrete U-boat pens loomed over the harbor like fortresses. A brass band played on the dock. French girls waved handkerchiefs. Capitaine Zur-See Victor Schütze, commander of the 7th U-boat flotilla, personally greeted U-96 as it tied up. That night in the officers' mess, champagne flowed freely. Lehman Willenbrock sat at a table with 3 other commanders, all wearing the Knight's Cross with its distinctive ribbon. They spoke in low voices about the latest developments. New torpedo models, reports of American convoys, rumors about British countermeasures. "I heard Captain Lieutenant Schepke was sunk last month," said one commander, referring to Joachim Schepke, who had 39 confirmed kills before being depth-charged to death. Rammed by a destroyer after being forced to surface. "Bad luck," another said. "He was one of the best." "Luck had nothing to do with it," said a third. "I've heard from other commanders about something new. British escorts attacking differently, not passing over us anymore. Something with forward-throwing weapons." Lehman Willenbrock listened, but said nothing. He had heard similar rumors, whispers of a new British anti-submarine weapon that somehow violated the fundamental rules of depth-charge warfare. But he had no confirmation. Just rumors passed between nervous crews in darkened bars. He pushed the thought away and refilled his champagne glass. Outside, the Atlantic waited. Tomorrow or the day after, he would take U-96 back out to hunt. The British would keep trying to kill him with their depth charges. He would keep evading them. The pattern was established. The mathematics were in Germany's favor. In the spring of 1942, as Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Lehman Willenbrock prepared for his next patrol, he had every reason for confidence. He had survived one of the longest depth charge attacks on record. He had sunk 24 ships. He was among the elite of the Kriegsmarine, a master of his craft, a hunter who understood how to survive being hunted. What he didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that across the channel in British workshops, engineers were testing a weapon that would make everything he had learned obsolete. A weapon that didn't explode where U-boats had been. A weapon that only detonated on direct contact. A weapon that turned every attack into a potential kill. The weapon was called Hedgehog, and within 18 months it would transform the Battle of the Atlantic from a contest Germany was winning into a slaughter Germany could not survive. But on that February evening in 1942, drinking champagne in Lorient while French girls danced and the band played, Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock believed he was invincible. He was wrong. March 7, 1943, 180 feet beneath the North Atlantic, 240 miles west of Ireland, Oberleutnant zur See Carl Fischer pressed his eye against the attack periscope of U-338, watching the British convoy crawl across the horizon through the gray afternoon light. 23 merchant ships in 6 columns protected by perhaps 7 escorts. The mathematics were simple. 14 torpedoes aboard U-338 against 23 targets. With luck and skill, they could sink 4, maybe 5 ships before the destroyers forced them deep. Fischer was 27 years old and had already survived 8 combat patrols. He knew the dance intimately. Fire torpedoes, dive deep, endure the depth charge attacks, evade, surface, repeat. The British escorts were dangerous but predictable. They followed patterns that a skilled commander could exploit. Stay silent at depth, let the charges explode harmlessly around you, wait for the destroyers to give up and return to the convoy, then surface and hunt again. Target bearing 270 degrees, Fischer said quietly to his crew. Range 4,000 meters, 2 escorts visible. Prepare tubes 1 through 4. The crew moved through their tasks with the efficiency of men who had done this dozens of times. In the torpedo room, mechanics checked firing mechanisms. In the control room, the navigator plotted intercept courses. The electric motors hummed as U-338 crept forward at 3 knots, slow enough to minimize noise. Fischer watched one of the escorts through the periscope, a British destroyer, perhaps a Flower-class corvette, making lazy circles ahead of the convoy. Standard patrol pattern. Nothing unusual. The escort would be perhaps 2,000 meters away when he fired his torpedoes, far enough that U-338 could dive and be at 150 meters depth before the destroyer could reach their position. Range 3,000 meters, speed 7 knots, angle on the bow 15 degrees port. The lead merchant ship was a tanker, perhaps 8,000 tons. A beautiful target. 1 torpedo would crack it open. The second ship looked like a cargo vessel, loaded with supplies for Britain's war effort. Fischer felt no emotion about this, no hatred, no guilt, just professional assessment. These were targets. Destroying them was his duty. Fire 1, he ordered. The boat shuddered slightly as compressed air ejected the first torpedo. Fire 2, Fire 3, Fire 4. 4 G7E electric torpedoes, each carrying 280 kilograms of explosives, raced through the water at 30 knots toward the convoy. Fischer kept his eye on the periscope, counting seconds. 60 seconds, 70, 80. The first explosion bloomed against the tanker's hull, a fountain of flame and water visible even from 3 kilometers away. The second torpedo missed. He saw the wake pass harmlessly behind the cargo ship. The third and fourth both struck home. 1 more hit on the tanker, 1 against a different freighter. Dive. Take her to 180 meters, all ahead full on batteries. U-338's bow tilted downward sharply as ballast tanks flooded. The crew grabbed handholds as the deck angled. Fischer climbed down from the conning tower, sealing the hatch behind him. Around him, 47 men in a steel cylinder prepared to endure what came next. Through the hull, they could hear the distant rumble of the convoy's propellers. Then, much closer, the distinctive higher pitch of a destroyer's screws racing toward them at high speed. "Destroyer closing from bearing 285, the sound operator reported. "Range 1,000 meters and closing fast." Fisher checked his watch. U-338 was at 140 meters depth, descending. The destroyer would reach their position in approximately 2 minutes. Standard procedure was to pass directly overhead and drop depth charges from stern racks. During those critical seconds when the destroyer crossed above them, sonar contact would be lost. The British had a blind spot directly beneath their hull. That was when Fisher would order hard rudder, changing course violently while the destroyer couldn't track them. By the time the depth charges exploded and sonar was restored, U-338 would be heading a different direction. "Steady at 180 meters, the helmsman reported. "Silent running," Fisher ordered. The electric motors stopped. Ventilation fans ceased. Men stood motionless. The only sound was the destroyer's propellers growing louder, directly overhead now, and then a sound Fisher had never heard before. Splash, 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 splash. Not the heavy tumbling of depth charges falling from stern racks. This was different, lighter. Multiple objects hitting the water ahead of the destroyer, not behind it. Fisher's mind raced. Some new British tactic? Were they dropping charges in a different pattern? "Contact lost," the sound operator whispered. "Multiple splashes bearing 090, estimate 20-plus objects entering water, not depth charges, something else." The crew looked at Fisher. He had no answers. In 8 patrols, he had survived dozens of depth charge attacks. He knew the patterns, the sounds, the timing. This was wrong, different. 30 seconds of silence. The destroyer's propellers passed, moving away now. Fisher waited for the explosions, the rolling thunder of 300-pound depth charges detonating in sequence at preset depths. They always exploded, always. Whether they hit anything or not, the time delay fuses would trigger the charges. 40 seconds, 50 seconds, no explosions. "They missed?" the chief engineer whispered, his voice carrying disbelief and hope in equal measure. "Quiet," Fisher snapped, but his mind was racing. Those splashes, 20-plus contacts hitting the water, if they were depth charges, they should be exploding right now. The silence meant, what? A malfunction? Defective fuses? Had the British dropped duds? 1 minute. Still no explosions. The destroyer's propellers were growing fainter, circling back. Relief flickered across the crew's faces. Whatever the British had tried, it had failed. They were safe. 300 yards away and 180 feet above U-338, Captain Frederick Walker stood on the bridge of HMS Starling, watching the Atlantic swells where his Hedgehog bombs had splashed down. 24 projectiles forming an elliptical pattern roughly where the submarine should be. Silence. "No detonations, sir," his weapons officer reported, disappointment evident in his voice. Walker nodded slowly. The Hedgehog bombs only exploded on contact. No explosions meant they'd missed. The pattern had fallen short or wide, the bombs sinking silently to the ocean floor. The U-boat was still alive down there. "Come about," Walker ordered. "Maintain sonar contact. Prepare for second attack." Unlike depth charges, the Hedgehog attack hadn't deafened his sonar with massive explosions. His operator still had a clear picture of the submarine's position. And more importantly, the U-boat commander didn't know what had just happened. He would think he'd survived a failed attack. He would be confident, maybe even contemptuous of British incompetence. That confidence would kill him. "Contact holding, sir," the sonar operator called. "Target at 180 meters, bearing 095. Still stationary." "Increase to 12 knots," Walker said. "Adjust attack angle by 3 degrees to starboard." On the foredeck, the Hedgehog crew reloaded. 24 more bombs, each carefully placed on its spigot, each 65-pound projectile packed with 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, each equipped with a contact fuse that would only detonate if it struck something solid. Starling turned through the gray Atlantic swells, positioning for a second run. The crew moved with practiced efficiency. They had drilled this attack pattern hundreds of times in Scottish waters, refining their aim until they could place bombs within a 50-meter circle at 250 yards range. Range 600 yards and closing. The U-boat commander below would hear them coming. He would prepare for another attack, but he would be expecting depth charges dropped from astern. He would be ready to execute his evasion when the destroyer passed overhead. He would never get the chance. Range 400 yards. Hedgehog crew, stand by. Walker watched his sonar display. The contact was solid, unmoving. The submarine was directly ahead, 180 meters deep, probably listening to Starling's approach with growing concern, but also with confidence born from experience. Depth charges could be evaded. This commander had done it before. He would do it again. Range 300 yards. Fire. Thump, 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 thump. 24 Hedgehog bombs arced through the air in a rippling salvo, 2 projectiles launching every 1/10 of a second. They splashed down in an elliptical pattern 250 yards ahead of Starling's bow, exactly where the submarine sat waiting. Fisher heard the splashes again. 20-plus contacts, the same distinctive lighter sound. Dead ahead this time, much closer. "Same weapon," the sound operator whispered. "Multiple contacts entering water, bearing 010, very close." This time, Fisher understood. Not depth charges, some kind of forward-throwing weapon. The British were attacking ahead of their ship, not dropping charges astern, but the first attack had produced no explosions. Whatever this weapon was, it didn't seem to work. 10 seconds, 20 seconds, still no explosions. Fisher allowed himself a thin smile. British desperation, some new untested weapon that didn't function properly. They could fire it all day, and the first bomb hit U-338's pressure hull directly above the control room. The explosion was nothing like a depth charge detonating nearby. This was immediate, focused, catastrophic. The contact fuse triggered 35 pounds of Torpex. On impact with steel, the blast punched through the pressure hull like a hammer through glass. A second bomb struck 3 meters aft, penetrating the hull and detonating inside the engine room. A third bomb hit near the stern, rupturing fuel tanks and flooding the after compartments. The pressure hull, designed to withstand the slow, crushing force of deep water, couldn't resist the focused violence of direct explosive contact. Steel plates buckled inward. Welds failed. Seams split open. Water roared into U-338 through 3 separate breaches simultaneously. At 180 meters depth, the pressure was over 250 pounds per square inch. The Atlantic didn't seep in. It erupted with the force of high-pressure fire hoses, flooding compartments in seconds. Fisher had one moment of terrible clarity. He understood exactly what had happened. The British weren't dropping bombs that exploded at depth. They were dropping bombs that only exploded on contact. The first attack had missed. This one hadn't. Then the water reached him, and there was no more time for understanding. The lights failed. Emergency systems died. The hull groaned once, a tortured metal scream, and then U-338's stern collapsed inward as water pressure exceeded the structural limits. The submarine broke apart 180 meters beneath the surface, disintegrating into metal fragments and human remains that would never be recovered. From the moment the first bomb struck to final disintegration took 11 seconds. On Starling's bridge, Walker heard 3 explosions in rapid sequence, Boom, boom, boom. "3 detonations, sir," the weapons officer shouted, forgetting protocol in his excitement. "Direct hits." The sonar operator's voice was more controlled, but equally certain. "Contact lost, sir. No propeller sounds. No hull noises. Target destroyed." Walker waited. This was the critical confirmation. With depth charges, losing sonar contact meant nothing. The submarine could have escaped in the confusion. But Hedgehog only exploded on direct contact. 3 explosions meant 3 direct hits on the submarine's hull. "Search pattern," Walker ordered. "Look for debris and survivors." They found the oil slick first, a spreading darkness on the gray Atlantic that marked U-338's grave. Then debris began surfacing, wooden fragments from interior fittings, life jackets that would never save anyone, personal items, a sailor's cap, photographs, a leather boot, and bodies. 4 German sailors floated among the wreckage, killed instantly by the explosions or drowned in the flooding. Their blue Kriegsmarine uniforms were already soaking up seawater, weighing them down. Within hours they would sink and join their boat on the ocean floor. Walker ordered the search to continue for another hour, but no survivors were found. U-338's entire crew, 48 men, including Oberleutnant Zur See Karl Fischer, had died in those 11 seconds. The convoy continued east. 1 tanker and 1 freighter had been sunk by Fischer's torpedoes before Starling destroyed U-338. Perhaps 60 merchant sailors had died, but 1 U-boat and its entire crew were gone, and that calculus was beginning to shift in favor of the Allies. The news spread through the U-boat force within days. Fischer's boat had failed to return. Another commander reported a strange new British weapon, bombs that splashed down ahead of destroyers rather than dropping astern. A 3rd submarine survived an attack and described hearing multiple splashes, followed by explosions only when the bombs found their target. In Lorient, in the bars where U-boat crews drank between patrols, the conversations changed. The swagger remained, but underneath it, a new current of fear. "They're attacking differently," one commander told Lehman Willenbrock in late March. "Not passing over us anymore, dropping something ahead." Fischer heard the splashes twice. The first attack missed, but the second one destroyed him. Lehman Willenbrock listened carefully. He had heard similar reports from other commanders. The British had changed tactics. The old evasion techniques, waiting for the blind spot, changing course during depth charge drops, no longer worked against this new weapon. "The explosions only happen if they hit," another commander added, his voice tight. "If you hear them splash and there's no explosion, you survived. But if you hear explosions..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The mathematics had changed. With depth charges, explosions meant the enemy was attacking but probably missing. With this new weapon, explosions meant you were already dead. By May 1943, the U-boat force had lost 41 submarines in a single month, the highest loss rate of the entire war. Admiral Dönitz made the decision that effectively ended Germany's campaign in the North Atlantic. He withdrew the wolf packs from the convoy routes, admitting what had become undeniable. The cost of operations had become unsustainable. The Hedgehog, that ugly assemblage of spigots and bombs that looked like a medieval torture device, had helped break the back of Germany's U-boat arm. It wasn't the only weapon, and it wasn't the only factor, but it represented a fundamental shift in anti-submarine warfare, from area saturation to precise targeting, from hoping for lucky hits to demanding accuracy. And most devastatingly, it created a new psychological reality for U-boat crews. With depth charges, survival was possible through skill and luck. With Hedgehog, survival depended entirely on the attacking ship missing. There was no evasion, no clever tactics, no moment of blindness to exploit. The only way to know if the attack had succeeded was if you died. In post-war interrogations, surviving U-boat commanders consistently cited Hedgehog as the weapon they feared most. One veteran of 7 patrols summarized it simply: with depth charges, we had options. With Hedgehog, we had only the hope that they would miss. And when we heard the explosions, we knew we were already ghosts. The Atlantic had turned against Germany, one contact-detonated bomb at a time. And in harbors across occupied France, U-boat crews prepared for patrols, with the knowledge that the sea they were about to enter was no longer a place where skill and experience guaranteed survival. The hunters had become the hunted, and the mathematics of modern war had spoken their verdict. May 24, 1943. BDU headquarters, Paris. Admiral Karl Dönitz stood at the large map table in the operations room, staring at the red pins that marked U-boat positions across the Atlantic, or rather the pins that marked where U-boats had been before going silent. In the past 30 days, 41 submarines had failed to return. 41 boats, over 2,000 men, gone. The mathematics were irrefutable and devastating. Herr Großadmiral, his operations officer, Kapitän zur See Eberhard Gott, placed another report on the table. U-954 reported lost with all hands. Last transmission indicated contact with convoy HX-239. No further word. Dönitz nodded slowly, his face carved from stone. He had commanded the U-boat force since 1935, had built it from nothing into Germany's most effective weapon against Britain. He knew every commander by name. He had attended their weddings, met their families, personally awarded decorations, and now he was watching them die at a rate that made victory impossible. The April losses were 39 boats. Gott continued quietly. May will exceed 40. Herr Großadmiral, we cannot sustain this rate. Training new crews takes 6 months. Building new boats takes 8. We are losing them faster than we can replace them. Dönitz picked up one of the loss reports. U-338, Carl Fischer's boat. An experienced commander, 8 successful patrols, torpedoed 2 ships before disappearing. The British claimed a sinking, some new weapon called Hedgehog. No survivors. He remembered Fischer, 27 years old, Knight's Cross holder, married with a young daughter in Hamburg. The daughter would grow up never knowing her father died, because British engineers had created a weapon that gave U-boat commanders no chance to evade. What are the commanders reporting? Dönitz asked, though he already knew the answer. The reports had been consistent for weeks. Gott consulted his notes. All commanders report the same pattern, Herr Großadmiral. British escorts attacking differently, no longer passing overhead, forward-throwing weapons that only explode on contact. Lehmann Willenbrock of U-96 survived an attack last week. His report states that the old evasion tactics are worthless against this weapon. Lehmann Willenbrock, one of their best. If he was saying the tactics no longer worked, then the situation was even worse than the statistics suggested. Dönitz walked to the window overlooking Paris. The city glittered in the morning sun, seemingly untouched by the war grinding through its 5th year. Down in those streets, German soldiers walked with French girls. Officers ate in fine restaurants. The Reich still appeared strong, invincible. But here, in this operations room, the truth was unavoidable. Germany was losing the Battle of the Atlantic, and once the Atlantic was lost, the war was lost. The British have broken the equations, Dönitz said quietly. We designed our tactics around depth charges, weapons that exploded whether they hit or not. Our commanders learned to evade during the blind spot, when escorts passed overhead. This new weapon eliminates the blind spot. It fires ahead. It maintains sonar contact throughout the attack, and it only explodes on direct hits. Yes, Herr Großadmiral. What is our current operational strength in the Atlantic? 47 boats at sea, another 63 in port, preparing for patrol or undergoing repairs. Dönitz did the calculation automatically. 47 boats against perhaps 200 Allied escorts. Even if every U-boat sank 2 ships before being destroyed, an optimistic ratio given current loss rates, it wouldn't matter. Allied shipbuilding had reached levels that made German sinking rates irrelevant. The Americans were building Liberty ships faster than U-boats could sink them, and now, with this Hedgehog weapon spreading through the escort fleet, U-boats were being destroyed at rates that made continued operations suicidal. "Prepare a message to all boats at sea," Donitz said. "Effective immediately, withdraw from North Atlantic convoy routes. Fall back to defensive positions south of the Azores." Gott looked up sharply. "Herr Grossadmiral, that is tantamount to—" "I know what it is, Capitan," Donitz interrupted. "It is an admission that we can no longer win, but I will not send more crews to certain death for no strategic purpose. We have lost the Atlantic. We will preserve what forces remain for defensive operations." The order went out that afternoon. Across the North Atlantic, U-boat commanders received the signal, "Withdraw, proceed to southern stations, avoid convoy engagements." For the wolf packs that had dominated the Atlantic for 3 years, it was the end. June 15, 1943, U-96, Bay of Biscay. Korvettenkapitän Heinrich Lehmann-Willenbrock read the withdrawal order for the 3rd time, then carefully folded the message and placed it in his logbook beside his last entry. Vessel number 27, Norwegian freighter, 5,200 tons, torpedoed and sunk. Position 49°15 UN 1842W. 27 ships in 9 patrols. It would have to be enough. He climbed to the bridge where the watch officer stood scanning the horizon. The Bay of Biscay was becoming increasingly dangerous. British aircraft patrolled constantly now, hunting U-boats in transit to and from their French bases. Many boats never made it past the bay. "All engines ahead full," Lehmann-Willenbrock ordered. "Make for Lorient. We're going home." As U-96 surged forward across calm seas, Lehmann-Willenbrock thought about the attack he had survived 3 weeks earlier. The strange splashing sounds, the silence, then the second attack that had missed by meters. If those bombs had hit, he would be dead. His entire crew would be dead. And the British would never have known his name. That was what made this new weapon so terrifying. Not just that it killed, depth charges killed too, but that it eliminated every technique experienced commanders had developed over 3 years of warfare. All the skill, all the knowledge, all the tricks that had kept him alive through 9 patrols meant nothing against a weapon that maintained sonar contact until the moment of impact. In Lorient, the atmosphere had changed dramatically in recent weeks. The brass band still played when boats returned, but the music felt hollow. Too many pens stood empty. Too many crews failed to return. The bars were quieter. The swagger was gone, replaced by a grim determination mixed with the certain knowledge that the next patrol might be the last. Lehmann-Willenbrock entered the officers' mess 3 days later, back in port after U-96's successful transit through the bay. The room fell silent as he walked in. Every officer there knew him by reputation, one of the aces, a survivor, a commander who brought his crew home. "Heinrich," said Kapitänleutnant Werner Henke, commander of U-515, waving him over. "We heard about your encounter, the new British weapon." Lehmann-Willenbrock sat down heavily. "It changes everything, Werner. The old tactics are worthless. When they attack, there's no blind spot to exploit. You just hear the splashes and pray they miss. And if they hit, you die. 3 bombs struck U-338 last month. Fisher and his entire crew gone in seconds." The other commanders around the table exchanged glances. Fisher had been one of the best. If the new weapon could kill him, it could kill anyone. "The withdrawal order," another commander said quietly. "What does it mean?" Lehmann-Willenbrock looked at him, a young officer, perhaps 24, preparing for his second patrol. "It means we've lost. The Admiral won't say it that way, but that's what it means. We can't operate in the North Atlantic anymore. Too many escorts, too many aircraft, and now this Hedgehog that gives us no chance to evade. So we just give up. We preserve what strength remains for defensive operations. When the Allies invade France, and they will invade, U-boats may still have some role to play. But the battle we trained for, the campaign to strangle Britain by cutting their supply lines, that battle is over. The British and Americans have won it. The young commander looked like he wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. How do you argue with 41 boats lost in a month? How do you deny the mathematics of unsustainable attrition? That night, Lehman Willenbrock walked through Lorient alone. The streets were dark under blackout conditions, but he knew the way by memory. He thought about the men he had known who were gone now. Shepka, rammed while surfacing. Prian, lost with all hands in March 1941. Kretschmer, captured but alive at least. And Fischer, killed by a weapon that only exploded on contact. The irony was crushing. Germany had started the war with the most advanced submarine force in the world. The Type 7 U-boat was a marvel of engineering, fast, maneuverable, capable of diving to depths Allied submarines couldn't match. German commanders were the best trained, most experienced submariners on Earth, and yet they had lost. Lost to better radar, better sonar, better tactics, and weapons like Hedgehog that eliminated the fundamental advantages submarines had always possessed. The ocean was no longer a place where U-boats could hide and hunt. It had become a killing ground where Allied technology hunted German crews with ruthless efficiency. By the war's end, the statistics would tell the story with brutal clarity. Of 1,162 U-boats commissioned during the war, 785 would be lost, a casualty rate of 67%. Of approximately 40,000 men who served in U-boats, 28,000 would die and 5,000 would be captured, a 70% casualty rate. No other branch of any military in World War II would suffer losses on that scale. The Hedgehog alone would account for at least 50 confirmed U-boat kills, with dozens more damaged so severely they never completed their patrols. But more than the direct kills, the weapon's psychological impact was incalculable. It broke the confidence of commanders who had previously believed skill and experience could keep them alive. It created a new reality where survival depended purely on the attacking ship missing. And when you knew that any explosion meant you were already dead, when you understood that there was no evasion possible, that no amount of skill could save you, it changed how men thought about going to sea. In London, British naval intelligence monitored the German withdrawal with satisfaction. The decrypt of Donitz's order to pull back from North Atlantic convoy routes had been intercepted, decoded, and analyzed within hours of transmission. The Germans didn't know that their Enigma code had been broken, that every message they sent was being read by Allied cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park. "They're withdrawing," Admiral Percy Noble told his staff. "The U-boat offensive in the North Atlantic is finished." The convoy system had held, the escorts had prevailed, and weapons like Hedgehog had turned the mathematical advantage decisively against Germany. In May 1943, Allied shipping losses in the Atlantic had dropped to 264,000 tons, the lowest monthly total in 2 years. Meanwhile, 41 U-boats had been destroyed. The exchange rate that had once favored Germany had reversed catastrophically. By June, the trend accelerated. Convoys were crossing with minimal losses. The wolf packs that had terrorized the Atlantic were gone, withdrawn to stations where they could do little damage. The Battle of the Atlantic, which had raged since September 1939, was effectively over. The Allies had won. Heinrich Lehmann Willenbrock would survive the war. U-96 would be bombed and sunk at her moorings in Wilhelmshaven in March 1945. But Lehman Willenbrock was ashore at the time. He would be captured by British forces in May 1945 and spend 2 years as a prisoner of war before returning to Germany. In post-war interviews, he spoke candidly about the impact of weapons like Hedgehog. "We had learned to survive depth charges," he said in 1968. "We understood the patterns, knew how to evade. But this new weapon eliminated everything we had learned. There was no evasion, no tricks, no clever tactics. You either survived because they missed, or you died because they hit. That was all." Asked if he believed Germany could have won the Battle of the Atlantic, he was equally direct. "No. Even without Hedgehog, we would have lost. The Allies were building ships faster than we could sink them. They had radar, sonar, and air cover we couldn't match. And they had the advantage of reading our messages, though we didn't know that until after the war. Hedgehog simply accelerated our defeat. It turned unsustainable losses into catastrophic ones. The weapon itself would continue in service for decades after the war. American, British, and Soviet navies would all employ versions of the Hedgehog into the 1980s. The principle, forward-throwing weapons that maintain sonar contact, would become standard doctrine for anti-submarine warfare worldwide. But in May 1943, standing in that operations room in Paris, Admiral Dönitz understood that he was witnessing the end of an era. The wolf packs that had nearly brought Britain to her knees were finished. The hunters had become the hunted, and the mathematics of modern warfare had rendered submarine warfare, as Germany practiced it, obsolete. The Atlantic belonged to the Allies now, and no amount of courage or skill from German crews could change that reality. The Hedgehog, that ungainly collection of spigots and bombs, had helped write the verdict. Germany had lost the sea war, and with that loss, the path to final defeat had become inevitable.